Matthew. We're in the 28th chapter. We've been talking about, just began last week, talking about the resurrection of Christ. And what we're looking at is looking at some of the reasons that people have for not believing in Christ's resurrection. I mentioned a little book, Who Moved the Stone? Mr. Morrison wrote that book, not intending it to be a book defending the resurrection, but his efforts were to try to prove that the resurrection of Christ never did occur. But he said the more he studied about that last week of Christ's life and looked at it and all the evidence available, he became to conviction that, number one, two things had to be determined and resolved in your mind before you could accept the fact that Christ was not risen from the dead. And he mentioned those two things. Number one, you've got to determine what happened to that body. I mean, why was the tomb empty? And number two, then he says you've got to decide how do you explain all of the eyewitnesses, those who profess to have seen Jesus after he had been put to death. They saw him risen from the dead. And so those two questions, so we began looking at those last week. And in the book of Matthew, Matthew points out that the very first excuse or reason that people gave for not believing the resurrection was the claim that his disciples had stolen the body. And it pointed out that Matthew talks about it. He says that the day that he's writing, that was still what the Jews were saying about it. That he had not risen from the dead, but his disciples had come in and stolen that body away and then tried to profess to everybody he's been risen from the dead. So as we began looking at that, there are a couple of things that they wanted to mention about it. And we mentioned the question, why, first of all, why were soldiers placed at the tomb of Jesus? We talked about that. What was the purpose of those Jews asking Pilate for guards to be placed there at the tomb of Jesus? To secure the tomb. In what way? Yeah, we're going to talk about that. The penalty is death for that. Yeah, to keep the disciples from stealing the body. That's what they said to Pilate. They said this man, but before his death, he had told them that he was going to be raised on the third day. So they said, we want guards placed there, for that time period. So the disciples can't come in and steal the body. And if they steal the body away, then they're going to start spreading the story throughout Jerusalem and throughout Judea, that Jesus is risen from the dead. And he said it'll become worse than it was before. And so they're wanting to prevent that. So they paid the soldiers money to lie about it. Now, one of the things that was mentioned over here, the fact that would a person be willing to lie about it and say that? Because if the soldier, if the body was stolen by the disciples, what does that put the soldiers at? They're responsible for that. And as a result of it, the penalty for that would be death. We do know, we have examples in the Bible, when people allowed someone that's under their charge, someone that they've been given responsibility to keep, if that person escapes, then those who allowed that escape to happen would be subject to whatever penalty that person was being held for. Now, you have an example given to us in the book of Acts on an occasion where the Apostle Peter has been arrested. He's been put in prison. He's chained between two guards. Then outside the gate, there are guards stationed. And then there's another gate that he'd have to go through that's locked. And there are guards there. And we know from the Bible that an angel came in. Had to awaken Peter. He was asleep. Told him to stand up. And when he did, his chains fell off of him. They passed through the first gate and the second gate. The gates opened on their own and allowed them to escape. And later on, when it was found out what had happened, turn over to the book of Acts for just a moment and look at this. In Acts chapter 12, and I'd like somebody to look at that passage for us. I don't have that on there. Who's got that passage? Acts chapter 12, verses 18 and 19. Okay. Peter's gone. They can't find him. They don't know how it happened. So he examined the guards. It would be interesting to know what kind of examination this was. Sometimes, examinations of that nature might involve a flogging. You ever heard somebody talk about, I'll beat the truth out of you? In other words, we're going to get to the matter here about it. But when he's not satisfied with them, he has them put to death. And so I believe these soldiers here who've been put there to guard the tomb of Jesus, and as we talked about it, in effect, Pilate was saying, keep Jesus in the grave if you can. But when that tomb becomes empty, then they're held responsible for it. Yeah, that if you break that seal, then you're under penalty of wrong. There, you could be put to death for that. Yes, sir.
Were these Roman soldiers that Pilate assigned, or was this the
Yeah.
guard? He said, "You have a watch. You make it as secure as you can." It didn't sound like to me he was committing Roman soldiers.
Well, I was thinking that it was Roman soldiers. The way he expressed it, when he says you have a guard, in other words, he was giving it. They are asking him for it. If it was the temple guards they had, they wouldn't have had to ask Pilate for permission for that. So anyhow, number one, I see this as a problem. Why would these soldiers do it? Well, the soldiers are given money, and their promise is, if this comes to the governor's ear, we'll keep you safe. Now, whether or not those Jewish leaders would have been able to do that, I don't know. But those soldiers would be taking a mighty big risk in saying that the disciples stole the body. Yes, sir. Right, yeah. Before that seal was put on there, they made sure he was there, so they knew he was in there, and now he's gone. So like Mr. Morrison said in his book, you've got to answer this question. What happened? If that tomb's empty, what happened to the body? Well, here's the first, and the Bible points us out. Matthew said this was the first thing that those people began saying, that the body was stolen by the disciples of Jesus. And so he hasn't really been resurrected from the dead. Now, I put the question, is it reasonable to think that this is true? And I think there's a number of reasons to suggest it's not true. Number one, would those guards have been willing to put their own life in danger by saying that he's been stolen? But another question in regard to that is, what did the soldiers say they were doing when the body was stolen? Yeah, they said they were asleep. Now, if they were sleeping, how do they know what happened to the body? And how do they know if the body was stolen? How do they know it was the disciples that did it? I've thought about that so many times. If somebody broke into my house and stole whatever they wanted out of that house, while I'm asleep, and then I call the police to come investigate, and I tell them I know who did it. And I was asleep when they came. Well, they're not going to accept that as being credible evidence. They couldn't say that I'm an evidence to what really happened. If I was asleep, I wouldn't have known what was happening. So again, for that reason, it doesn't make sense to me. I don't think it's reasonable to think that what these soldiers are saying is true. Now, also, if they were asleep, you got tired, why have everybody asleep at one time? You had several soldiers there at the tomb. Why not say, okay, we'll leave one man, you stay awake for 2 hours while the rest of us sleep. Then after 2 hours, you'll wake one of us up and we'll take you. That's usually what soldiers do. They don't all go to sleep at one time. They have somebody to be alert to it. Why didn't they do that? And then 3, if they're all asleep and that stone is rolled away, you don't think that would awaken somebody up? I mean, this is not something that's set with ball bearings to roll smoothly out. It's something that would make a noise, you would think, when they're doing that. And so wouldn't that have awakened those soldiers at that time so they would have known what was doing? But again, that doesn't make sense to think that would have happened without wakening them up. So that was something that cost many of the Jews to believe it. Oh, okay, well, that explains the empty tomb. His disciples came and stole the body away, and so because of that, they would not believe in Christ. And so this is something that needed to be resolved. If the apostles are going to be successful and the other Christians in advancing the cause of Christ and getting people to believe that Jesus is the Son of God, they're going to have to believe that He was raised from the dead. And if they believe what those Jewish leaders are saying, then they're not going to believe in Christ. They're not going to accept this as evidence that He is the Messiah. But that's the number one thing they said. It was stolen by His enemies. All right? Number two, they suggest, not that the disciples stole it, but they say the enemies of Christ stole the body. Now, to me, that is a more unreasonable idea than the first one. Again, ask yourself the question, why are there guards placed at the tomb? It's to keep the body from being stolen. Now, their fear was that the disciples would do it. Nobody thought, well, His enemies, nobody thought, hey, well, we Jews are going to come steal His body away. And if that was the case, if that's what happened, why did they ask for a guard to prevent that from happening if their plan was they were going to steal the body? But there's something else about it. What if the enemies had stolen the body? Now, again, they want to keep Christ in the tomb because they want to prevent this idea of people believing that He's been raised and accepting Him as the Messiah. And so, here they come. The tomb's empty. How do you explain it? Well, we stole it. We, His enemies, we stole His body out of the tomb. Well, why would you do that if you're trying to prevent people from believing that He's been resurrected? And if that's the case, now, here's the disciples. They go out and they start preaching everywhere that Christ is risen from the dead, and this is the evidence, Romans chapter 1, verse 4, that He is the Son of God. And so you're trying to do it. You're trying to keep the people from doing it. What do you do to those Christians? Well, they beat them. They put them in prison. They took their property from them, and in some instances they put them to death. But that didn't stop them from preaching the gospel. But if the enemies had stolen the body, what could they have done to stop the Christians in their tracks, to keep them from being able to propagate this belief that Jesus is risen from the dead? Bring the body. If the enemy stole His body, and here these Christians, He's risen from the dead. He's just who He said He is. And no, wait a minute. We've got His body right here. And this is evidence to you people that He isn't risen from the dead. He's still dead. But the enemy never did that. And in fact, one of the things remarkable to me, the enemies never even suggested that the tomb had not emptied. They've never said, hey, He's still there in the tomb. They never claimed that. They accepted the fact that the tomb was empty. Their only way of explaining that was to say, well, the disciples stole it. They would never have done that themselves. But nonetheless, that's something that some people have said, that the enemy stole the body. A third way they've had, and I'm not sure if I'm putting all of these up there. If the disciples, I hadn't mentioned it, if the disciples stole the body, why would they have been willing to die? Now, do you remember when Peter is there and Jesus is on trial, and one of the damsels there says to Peter, aren't you one of His disciples? And Jesus denied He's not. And then another one says, surely you're one of His disciples because your speech betrays you. No, I'm not. And somebody else accused him. And he swears that he's not a disciple of Christ. Why did Peter do that? He was afraid of death. If I'm identified as His disciple, I may be put to death too. Now later on, Peter is willing to die. He accepts that. He stands before this very body of men who condemned Jesus, the Sanhedrin. He stood before them and professed his faith in Christ. And he told them, in effect, I'm not going to stop preaching. You judge, should I obey you or God? And Peter is so convinced that this is the command of God that he's willing to face death for it and does die for it. Now, why would he change? He's seen the risen Christ. He is convinced that Christ is risen from the dead. Now, if the disciples had stolen the body, because I meant to mention as it did, if the disciples had stolen the body, would they have been willing to die for something that they knew was a lie? Now, people can be mistaken sometimes. They can think something is true, and because they're convinced that it's true, even though it's false, if they're convinced it's true, they might be willing to die for it. But I don't believe people are going to be willing to die for something they definitely know to be false. And if the disciples stole the body, then they would know He's not risen. So I don't think they'd be willing to die for that, especially when they've already shown they were not willing to die for Him, even when they were convinced that He was the Messiah. And so, that just doesn't fit with it. So anyhow, these examples just keep going on. A third thing that they had about it was the belief that, I'm going to get past, that the disciples stole it, but didn't steal it, but they went to the wrong tomb. Kind of in a way, I can kind of understand this. My parents are buried out at the cemetery there off from the airport. And the last time I went over there to visit their grave, it took me forever to find it. I thought I knew exactly how to get to it, but it's a large cemetery, and there are graves all over that place, and you might know the second way you could go in there and ask about it, and they'd tell you what the plot was and where to find it. But just going over there, it's hard to locate. And I thought about that. You look at it. Whoa! Now he's out there buried somewhere. You might can find it, but you can see where it would be a difficulty. You might make a mistake and go to the wrong one. But question: where was Jesus buried? Yeah, in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. And it's a private plot. It's not something like this, where you just got graves all over the place, and you might go to the wrong one. But not only that, if they really wanted to check that out and see, did they go to the right tomb? Why didn't the enemy come along? Oh, you foolish Christians. You went to the wrong grave. Let me show you where he's buried. And again, you can see the stone still there in the seal, and if you want to get permission from Rome to open it up, you can look and see the body's there. But they never did that. But if they thought they went to the wrong tomb, Joseph of Arimathea could have said, oh, no, I know exactly where it is. It was my tomb. I'm the one that had it chiseled out for me to be buried in. He could take and show them the right one. So, the idea that they simply went to the wrong tomb doesn't really make sense here, because the others could have identified where it was at, and they could have shown them, the right tomb, and shown whether or not Jesus was still there. Then a fourth thing that's given here. It's called the swoon theory. What does swoon mean? Yeah. Well, that a person is passed out. Now, being crucified on that cross for those 6 hours, that he just loses consciousness. And they think he's dead. And when they took him down from the cross and they buried him in that cool, damp tomb, he revived. And this is, to me, I've heard people talk about it. This would be more of a miracle than just accepting the resurrection, because they believe he revived in there. He got up. Now remember, both of his feet have been impaled and his hands have been impaled, and he's been weakened by the beating he received, the scourging, and the 6 hours on the cross. And he gets up and he rolls that stone away. And those Roman soldiers out there, he overcomes them somehow or another to get past them and go out, and he walks a number of miles up to Galilee to meet with his disciples, and when they see him, he convinces them that he's been resurrected from the dead. Honestly, that doesn't make sense either, that someone could accept that. If you can believe that, why do you have a problem believing any miracle that occurred, to think that something of that nature would happen? Now, the truth of the matter is that the testimony given to us in the Bible over and over again from everybody is that Jesus really was dead. He hasn't just passed out, he's dead. Now, being on the cross just 6 hours, and then being dead in that period of time, that's kind of unusual, because sometimes they have examples that people have lasted on the cross for 3 days before they died. And so just 6 hours, that's why some people began to say, well, he wouldn't have been dead, he just fainted or something, and then revived later. But look at the testimony. When Joseph of Arimathea comes to Pilate to beg the body of Christ, the Bible says that Pilate marveled that Jesus was so soon dead. So what did he do? Before he delivers the body over to Joseph, what did Pilate do? Yeah, he had him checked. He called in the centurion who was in charge of the crucifixion and wants to know from him if Jesus was really dead. And the centurion testified that he was. Now these Roman soldiers, they've been around death. Maybe in battle, but they've been involved in crucifying people. There were thousands of people that were crucified by Rome. And so they know what death is. And we talked about it when the doctor that we read from discussing the death of Christ. After all they had gone through physically on the cross, remember that Roman soldier that took that spear and thrust it into Christ's side up through the ribs, and forthwith it says came blood and water mingled together? And the water would have been that serum in that pericardium around the heart coming out, and the blood would have come from the heart itself. And so he said this is evidence that Jesus has died not by asphyxiation, as normal would be the case if you stayed on the cross for a long period of time, but he's died from heart failure. The heart itself has stopped functioning. Maybe has even been pierced by that spear. And so, there's no way he could have survived that. And the Roman soldiers understood that, and they gave word to Pilate that he was dead. And so, he hasn't just passed out. He hasn't fainted from what's happened to him. Mark 15:44 and 45 is where Pilate marveled that he was already dead, and summoning the centurion, he asked him if he had been dead for some time. So when he found out from the centurion, he granted the body to Joseph. Once Pilate has been assured by the centurion that Jesus is dead, then he allows Joseph to take the body of Christ. And these soldiers had concluded that Jesus was dead. John chapter 19 and 33. The Sabbath is coming on, and they don't want the bodies left hanging on the cross over the Sabbath. So what does he do to ensure the death of the prisoners, to hasten their death so they can be taken down? Break their legs. And we talked about that. Hanging on that cross, when the body sags down and the weight's there on the nails through their wrist, they can breathe in, but they can't exhale. They can't breathe out. And so they have to put their weight on that nail through the feet and push themselves up so they can breathe out. Well, if you break somebody's legs, what does that do? They can't push up, so they can't breathe out. They're going to die of asphyxiation. They're going to be smothered, not able to breathe in and out as they need to do. And so they come and they break the legs of the prisoners, except for Jesus. Why didn't they break his legs? Yeah, they were convinced he's already dead, and convinced that he was already dead. That's when they decided not to break their legs, but they thrust that spear into his side. And again, yes, sir. From shock? All right. Just all of the evidence points to the fact of what's happened to him. It is actually dead. He hasn't simply fainted or pretended to be dead. He has died on that cross. And so the evidence there that he's dead. So the swoon theory, even if you took it at face value, it doesn't make sense. But when you realize the evidence is given from the people who are responsible for putting him to death, they conclude that Jesus was dead. Well, truth of the matter is, even Jesus admitted that he was dead. So if you're going to believe the Bible at all, you're going to have to believe what Christ said about it in Revelation chapter 1. I am he that was dead, and behold, I'm alive forevermore. So Jesus didn't say, I was he that fainted and came to. No, he said, I was dead, and I'm alive forevermore. So the swoon theory doesn't make sense. So the reasons that men have given to try to explain the empty tomb, none of them are valid. None of them are something that a person could put their confidence in. When I come to decide what I think about Jesus, is he the Christ? Is he not? Is he the Son of God? Is he not? Well, I look at the evidence that's given there of the resurrection, and I come to the conclusion, yeah, that didn't happen. But you don't have any reason. You don't have any logical reason for not believing that he's been resurrected. Why would someone do that? Now, the next thing that you have to consider is not only the fact that the tomb is empty, but it's also the fact that Jesus has appeared to so many different people. And how can you explain that? And this is the thing about that, the appearances after his resurrection. And we'll look at the different appearances that the Bible talks about in it. Look at Acts chapter 1 for just a moment. I want to very quickly look at Acts chapter 1 and verse 3. Who's got can read that for us? Acts chapter 1 and verse 3. All right, please, Brother Norris. Okay. You got to realize when we talk about the appearances of Christ as he didn't just appear to one or two people one day. For a period of 40 days, Jesus is seen by a number of different people after his resurrection. So you can't just blow this off as nothing. You've got to have some kind of explanation. If you're not going to accept it, then how do you explain his appearance to all these people? Well, I guess one thing you could do, well, we'll get to these. You could say that all these people are lying. They claim to have seen him, but they didn't. They're just lying to promote what they believe in. But again, why would these people be willing to suffer what they did and even to be put to death if they knew that what they were professing was something that was a lie? That doesn't make sense. There's one other thing that's talked about, and we'll look at this a little bit later as we look at some of these people. But the other idea that people have is that all these people just had an hallucination. They thought they were seeing something, but they weren't really seeing it. And we'll talk about that. But let's look at some of these. The very first appearance that Jesus made after his resurrection was to Mary Magdalene. Now there's several passages that talk about his appearance to her. It's given in Mark, Luke, and in John. But in Mark's account of it, especially is mentioned there in chapter 16 and verse 9, the statement I'll look at. Mark 16:9 says, Now when he rose early on the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene. So she's the first one to see him risen from the dead. And, who's Mary Magdalene? What connection does she have? Okay. I think it was 7 demons that he had cast out of her. And he appears to her, it's given there. Now, when you look at the account that's given, she comes to the tomb. She was one of the ladies who had begun, when Jesus was first buried, to anoint his body for the burial. But the Sabbath's coming on, so they don't have time. So they close the tomb up, and they have this idea we'll come back later. And so early on the first day of the week, they come there, and Mary is there at the tomb, and she notices that the tomb's open. The stone's rolled away. And when she looks in to the tomb, what does she see? 2 angels that are sitting there. One on either end there of it, in that tomb. And they asked her a question. What are you looking for? You know, and they tell her, he's not here, he's risen. And so that's the first time she has any idea that he's risen. But then as she turns away, she sees Jesus. But she doesn't recognize him. Who did she think it was? The gardener. And she's weeping, and Jesus asked her what she's weeping about. And she says, they've taken his body, and I don't know where they've laid him. And then Jesus simply said to her, Mary. And what was her response? She called him Rabboni, rabbi, teacher, and she fell at his feet. I don't know if it was just the fact that he knew who she was, or the way he said it, or what, that caused her to recognize who this was. It's not the gardener, this is Jesus. And he is alive. And so, you know, she is there to see that. And, you know, there are other occasions we're going to see others, the same type of things is going to happen to them. And the Bible's going to say that their eyes were restrained from recognizing him. That happened to the two on the road to Emmaus, that they didn't recognize who he was. And some have suggested, well, maybe, you know, with Mary here, her eyes are filled with tears, and so she doesn't see plainly who this is she's talking to. She thinks it must be the gardener there, and doesn't recognize that it's Jesus. But after he speaks to her, she becomes convinced of who he is. She speaks to him, and then the text says that she fell down at his feet and took hold of him. And then Jesus said, "Stop clinging to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father." Then he commanded her to go tell the disciples that I ascend to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God. It's interesting, I think. He didn't say, go tell my disciples I descend to our Father and to our God. He makes a distinction. There is a different relationship that Christ has to God than us. He's our Father. He's Jesus' Father, but not in the same way. And so he says, I ascend to my Father and to your Father, to my God and to your God. There's a relationship that Christ has that's different from us, a relationship with God. He is literally the Son of God. He is God in the flesh. And he wants us to understand that and recognize that. And he tells these women, so you go tell my disciples, you know, and they go and tell the disciples. But what was the result of that? What did the disciples say, the men that they go and tell that to, the apostles? They didn't believe them. You know, that's kind of amazing in a way that they wouldn't believe. But of course they didn't believe when Jesus was alive, and he kept telling them, you know, I'm going to go to Jerusalem, I'll be handed over to the Gentiles, and I'll be put to death, and after 3 days I'll be resurrected. But they didn't seem to pay any attention to that. Didn't accept that. And when it happens, they don't believe. Think about those two disciples walking on the road to Emmaus. They're walking along, and Jesus joins them, and again, the Bible talks about that their eyes are constrained, so they do not recognize who he is. But he sees they're sad, and he wants to know why, and they tell him, you know, are you a stranger to Jerusalem? You don't know what's happened there? And well, what things? Well, concerning Jesus of Nazareth, a prophet mighty indeed. And we had hoped, they said, that it was he who would deliver Israel. They had hoped in him before. They believed in him as being the Messiah, and they had hoped he's going to deliver. But that's gone now because he's dead. He's been put to death. What was Jesus' response to those two disciples? Do what? No. If you want to look over there to Luke chapter 24, it's interesting to me, his reaction to them. He is upset over them. Now these men go on, they say, yes, and besides all this, verse 21, It is now the third day since this happened. Moreover, some women of our company amazed us. They were at the tomb early in the morning and did not find his body, and they came back saying that they had even seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but him they did not see. And he said to them, this is Jesus speaking to these two disciples, O foolish men, and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory? And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them in all the Scriptures the things concerning himself. Jesus is disappointed in these two disciples, and not just them, but all these other disciples who refused to believe when these women said he's been raised from the dead. And he goes to length in showing them in the Old Testament Scriptures, the prophecies have been made of what was to happen to the Messiah. So they shouldn't have been surprised by this. They should not have been unbelieving when they're told that Jesus has been risen from the dead. And so that's the whole problem of it. They're not willing to listen to them. They don't believe Mary Magdalene when she talks about having seen him, that he's risen from the dead. The second appearance that he had was to the other women. Now, there were others that were there with Mary Magdalene, and evidently she was alone when she saw Jesus, but later on there's a reference to the fact that several others had been there with it. Let's see, Matthew chapter 28. If someone will read verse 9. Matthew 28 and verse 9. Chapter 28, verse 9, Bill. Okay. So them, plural. He appeared to several women at one time. Now, we're given, let's see, I thought I'd marked that down here. I was thinking it might have been in John's account, but let's see here. Let me see what else I got here. I didn't mark that down here, and I meant to. Let's see if I can look at that. In John's account, I was thinking it was in John's account, they mentioned the names of several of those women that were there. 21 verse 1. Now, what was the other verse somebody said? Of what, in John chapter 20 verse 14?
You also have Luke 24.
All right, maybe it was Luke 24. I know it was.
10 has Mary Magdalene, Joanna.
There you are. That's
Mary,
it.
the mother of James.
Okay. Yeah. So Luke 24 and verse 10, that mentions several of the other women that were with Mary at that time to whom he appeared. Mary Magdalene and Joanna and Mary, the mother of James, and other women with him who told this to the apostles. So there were several women that he appeared to after he appears to Mary. But again, the other disciples, when they tell them about it, they don't believe what they've seen. You know the old saying, it sounds too good to be true, and if it does, it's probably not. Well, I'm sure to these men, you know, that would have been something they wanted to be true, but it's like they're afraid to accept it. And some of them are not going to be willing to accept it until they've seen it for themselves before they will be willing to accept that.
Yeah, they just didn't believe the women, did they?
No, they didn't. Do you think it's still that way today? We just don't believe. All right, number 3, very quickly, we just get this in enough time. The third appearance was made to Peter. Luke 24, verses 33 and 34. It's mentioned there. It's also mentioned in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 that he appeared to Peter. But in the accounts given there in Luke 24, those two men on the road to Emmaus, they go back to tell people what they've saw. They've seen Jesus risen from the dead. And when they get there, there are those there, it says verse 34, who said, "The Lord has risen indeed and has appeared to Simon." So we're told that he appeared to Simon, but there's nothing said about the appearance of Christ to him, about what happened, what it was like. And Peter doesn't tell us anything more about it. Some people have said it may be, that simply that this was so important to Peter that he just couldn't, write about it to other people, about what had happened when Jesus appeared to him. He appears to Peter when Peter is by himself. And speculation has been that maybe, that Jesus appears to Peter at a special time and has some things to say to Peter to encourage him and to help him get back with the other disciples. Because we do know, one time, Peter said, "I go a-fishing." Evidently he had given up when Jesus has been put to death. And so he goes back to his old life as a fisherman. And Jesus had called him to become a fisher of men. Now he's going back to be a fisher of fishes. He's just not willing to accept that. But it was interesting. One individual writing about that says, "If Simon Peter ever told anyone what took place when the risen Lord met him, we have no record of it. The experience was probably too sacred for him to talk about, and we do well not to try to pull aside the curtain drawn around that meeting. However, I have wondered if Jesus did not encourage the remorseful disciple to take his place again among the apostles and join the others at their place of lodging. He seems to have been with Jesus, or with them, when Jesus appeared to them a little later." Something maybe special to encourage this man who had got to the point where he actually had denied Jesus 3 different times, and he would need that special encouragement. I love the statement that's made in Mark's account in Mark chapter 16 and verse 7. And I've talked about this before, but the statement there is, when the disciples are talking to those women, or the angels, and they say to those women, "Go tell his disciples and Peter that he is going before you into Galilee. There you will see him as he said to you." For some reason, the angels single out Peter and identify him directly. "Go tell my disciples and Peter." And I think that maybe the reason he would have done that because Jesus understood that maybe Peter, above all the others, needs that extra encouragement because he's the one that's denied him 3 times. And as one man said one time, he said, "I can just imagine the disciples have gathered together, and here's Peter over here maybe in a corner by himself with his head bowed. And these women come in, and they say that Jesus is risen today. He's appeared to us, and he's told us, and here's the message, go tell my disciples and Peter." And here's Peter over there. Lift his head up. "What? Are you sure about that? Are you sure," he said, "and Peter? Does Jesus still want me?" Sure he does. Now, that's an encouragement to Peter. It ought to be, just thinking about that, it should be an encouragement to every one of us. There are times in our lives when we feel like, just in a special way, I feel I don't deserve, God's salvation. I don't deserve his blessings. Well, that's probably the way Peter felt. That's what he did. But Peter wants him to know, "Go tell my disciples and Peter." Peter also was included that. Yes, sir?
But we learn from our mistakes, and Peter made a mistake by denying Christ 3 times, and he was going to be fearless, and he was.
He was.
He didn't stop at the tomb's edge. He goes flying in. So I think he knew that he would be fearless and defend his faith.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the reasons, boy, if Jesus can still want me and care for me after what I've done, man, I've got to do everything I can for him. I just won't do it. It's not going to save him, but it's going to show how much he loves and appreciates Christ. Okay, our time's gone. Let's have a word of prayer here before we're dismissed. Father, we thank thee so much for your love and your care for us. We pray you'll continue to be with us and bless us in our efforts to serve you in life. Help us, Father, to learn from the examples of your children in days past, of the mistakes that they made, and yet how, because of their love and their trust in Thee, they continue to serve Thee, and as a result, they became great blessings, regained great blessings from Thee, and became great blessings to others. Dismiss us now in your care, Father, and keep us near Thee always. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.